Well, it could be the end of a 90-year-long mystery. Archaeologists in Russia have found the bodies of a boy and a young woman they say could be the missing children of the murdered Tsar, Nicholas II.
Well, the remains were found close to the region where the Tsar and his family were killed. Richard Martin reports.
For more than a century, the fate of Russia's last imperial family has been one of history's most stubborn mysteries. Online, you'll still see claims that the bodies found near Yekaterinburg were never conclusively identified, that the DNA results are disputed, or that Anastasia may have escaped after all. But what does the actual evidence show? What people are saying? Walk through almost any corner of the internet where history meets mystery, and you'll find the Romanov story still being told as an unsolved case. Some posts insist that the remains found near Yekaterinburg were never properly matched to the Tsar and his family. Others point to the fact that the Russian Orthodox Church still has not officially recognized the bones, suggesting this proves serious doubt remains. And then there's the most persistent claim of all, that one of the Romanov daughters, most often Anastasia, somehow survived the execution and lived out her life under another name. These stories have real staying power, and it's easy to see why. The execution was carried out in secret. The Soviet government concealed the location of the bodies for more than 70 years. When the grave was finally revealed to the world, 2 of the 7 family members were missing from it. A steady parade of imposters claimed over the decades to be surviving Romanov children, with at least one of them, a woman named Anna Anderson, becoming famous enough to inspire films and books. For many people who have followed this story for years, it still feels open. So the real question is this: has modern DNA science actually identified the Romanovs, or are the skeptics right to say we can't really know? Before going further, if this kind of careful look at historical mysteries is worth seeing more of, consider subscribing. We dig into one of these each week, staying with the evidence rather than the rumors. What happened in 1918, in the early hours of July 17, 1918, in a basement in the city of Yekaterinburg in the Ural Mountains, 7 members of the Russian imperial family were shot by a Bolshevik firing squad. The victims were Tsar Nicholas II, his wife Tsarina Alexandra, their 4 daughters, Olga, Tatiana, Maria, and Anastasia, and their 13-year-old son, Alexei. 4 members of their household staff were killed alongside them, including the family physician, Dr. Eugene Botkin. The Bolsheviks wanted the deaths to be final and untraceable. The bodies were loaded onto a truck, taken into the forest, and an initial attempt was made to dispose of them in an abandoned mineshaft. When that failed, the remains were moved to a location known as Porosenkov Log, along an old cart track called the Koptyaki Road. Most of the bodies were buried together in a shallow pit. 2 were buried separately, a short distance away, and partly burned. The Soviet government then spent decades denying that any grave existed at all. The grave is found. The main grave was actually located in 1979, not 1991. A Russian geologist named Alexander Avdonin, working privately with filmmaker Gely Ryabov, used a decades-old report written by one of the executioners, Yakov Yurovsky, to identify the likely burial site near the old Koptyaki Road. They quietly recovered a few skulls, realized they could not get them analyzed safely under Soviet rule, and reburied the remains. Their discovery stayed secret until 1989, when Ryabov published an article revealing what they had found. Only after the Soviet Union collapsed was the site officially exhumed in 1991. What the excavation produced was 9 skeletons, not 11. 2 bodies were missing from the pit, which matched Yurovsky's own account that 2 of the bodies had been burned and buried separately. The question now became how to confirm, scientifically, whether these were really the Romanovs and which skeleton belonged to which person. The first DNA tests. The early 1990s work was led by Russian geneticist Dr. Pavel Ivanov and Dr. Peter Gill of the British Forensic Science Service, with Dr. Erika Hagelberg of Cambridge brought in to independently replicate the results. Their approach used 3 different kinds of DNA, and the distinctions matter, so it's worth a quick plain language breakdown. Nuclear DNA is the full genetic blend you inherit from both parents. Mitochondrial DNA is a single thread that passes almost unchanged down the maternal line from a mother to all her children. Y chromosome DNA does the same thing on the father's side, passing from father to son. Each one tells a different part of the family story, and together they can reconstruct an entire pedigree. Using nuclear markers, the team identified the sex of each skeleton and found a family unit inside the grave: a mother, a father, and 3 of their daughters. The other 4 skeletons were not related to this family, which fit with what was known about the servants who died that night. Mitochondrial DNA provided the decisive link to the outside world. To test the remains believed to be Tsarina Alexandra and her daughters, the investigators needed a living maternal relative. They found one in Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh. Prince Philip's grandmother, Princess Victoria of Hesse, was Alexandra's sister. That made him a direct maternal descendant of the same line. His mitochondrial DNA was consistent with the sequences from the woman and 3 young women in the grave. For the Tsar, the team compared the remains to maternal line relatives descending from Nicholas's grandmother, Louise of Hesse-Kassel. That comparison also matched, though it later required additional confirmation, and in 1994, the remains of Nicholas's brother, Grand Duke George, were exhumed to provide a closer maternal reference. Those results matched as well. The 1994 conclusion was that the 9 skeletons were, with very high probability, the Romanov family and their servants. But 2 questions remained. First, which daughter was missing? Was it Maria or Anastasia? Russian and American scientific teams disagreed. And second, where was Alexei, the only son and heir? This is where so much of the survival speculation lived for the next decade. The Anna Anderson question. Before we get to the missing children, it's worth addressing the most famous of the survival claims directly, because it was answered by the same science. Anna Anderson was a woman who appeared in Berlin in 1920, and for the rest of her life insisted she was Grand Duchess Anastasia. She attracted supporters, wrote memoirs, fought legal cases, and became the model for countless films and novels. Anderson died in 1984. Some of her tissue had been preserved from a hospital procedure in Virginia. In the mid-1990s, 2 separate laboratories, one American, one British, compared her mitochondrial DNA to the Romanov samples. The 2 teams used different sources, one a tissue sample, the other a lock of her hair, and reached the same result. Her DNA did not match the Romanov line. It matched a Polish family named Shanskowska. A woman named Franziska Shanskowska had disappeared in Berlin in 1920, around the same time Anderson first appeared. The evidence indicates Anna Anderson was not a Romanov. That finding closed one chapter. But 2 members of the family were still unaccounted for. The second grave. In the summer of 2007, 3 amateur archaeologists searching the area around the old Koptyaki Road discovered a second, smaller grave about 70 meters from the original site. Inside were 44 bone fragments and some teeth. The remains were badly burned and broken, which matched the historical accounts of what had happened to the 2 separately disposed bodies. By 2007, forensic DNA technology had advanced considerably beyond what was available in 1994. A team including Dr. Michael Koppel, then at the Armed Forces DNA Identification Laboratory in the United States, and Russian geneticist Dr. Evgeny Rogav, independently analyzed the new remains. They tested all 3 kinds of DNA we described earlier. Every result pointed in the same direction. The mitochondrial DNA from the 2 new individuals matched the Tsarina and the 3 daughters already identified in the first grave. The autosomal markers showed that the two new individuals were the biological children of the same two parents as the three daughters. The Y chromosome markers of the male skeleton from the second grave matched the Y chromosome of the Tsar, and also matched a distant living male Romanov relative who provided a reference sample. The statistical strength of the match is worth stating plainly. According to the peer-reviewed results published in PLOS One in 2009, the probability of the DNA evidence, assuming these were the missing Romanov children, versus the alternative that they were unrelated individuals, was roughly 4 trillion to 1 for the daughter and over 80 trillion to 1 for the son. In a separate analysis, geneticist Evgeny Rogayev calculated that the odds against the Tsar's remains being someone other than Nicholas II were on the order of 1 in a septillion. That's a 1 followed by 24 zeros. By the end of this work, researchers had identified all 7 members of the immediate imperial family. The male skeleton from the second grave was Alexei. The female skeleton was one of his sisters. The Maria versus Anastasia question. There is one caveat scientists have been honest about. DNA cannot, on its own, tell you which daughter was recovered from the second grave. The reason is simple. All 4 daughters of Nicholas and Alexandra shared the same parents, the same mitochondrial DNA from their mother, and very similar autosomal profiles. To distinguish one sister from another, you would need a unique reference sample belonging specifically to Maria or specifically to Anastasia, and no such sample exists. This is why a disagreement between Russian and American experts has persisted for decades. The Russian forensic team has long held that the daughter missing from the first grave and therefore recovered from the second was Maria. The American team that worked on the remains in the 1990s concluded she was Anastasia. The distinction depends on skeletal features such as bone development and dental age, not on DNA. Dr. Michael Cobble, who helped lead the 2009 analysis, has stated openly that the DNA results cannot settle which sister is which. So when you hear someone online say they still don't know which daughter is Anastasia, that part is actually true. What's not true is the leap from that to therefore one of them might have survived. Both daughters are accounted for. All 4 of them are. The uncertainty is only about which name belongs to which set of bones. This is a useful example of the difference between scientific honesty and survival mythology. Scientists say what they don't know. That humility then gets recycled online as evidence of a larger mystery that the data simply doesn't support. The 2015 to 2018 reinvestigation. In 2015, at the request of the Russian Orthodox Church, Russia's investigative committee reopened the case and ordered fresh DNA tests. This round involved exhuming the remains of Nicholas's father, Tsar Alexander III, to establish a father-son genetic link and collecting DNA samples from living Romanov relatives around the world. New samples were also taken from a blood-stained shirt Nicholas had worn in 1891 when he was wounded in an assassination attempt in Japan. That blood could be matched directly to the skeletal remains. In July 2018, on the centenary of the executions, the investigative committee announced that the latest tests again confirmed the remains as authentic. The finding was consistent with every previous round of testing conducted across multiple independent laboratories on 3 continents over a span of more than 25 years. At this point, the scientific picture was as settled as forensic identification cases ever get. The Church's position. So why then have you probably read that the Russian Orthodox Church still does not officially recognize the remains? This is one of the most frequently cited reasons to doubt the evidence, and it deserves a careful answer because it's often misunderstood. The Church's hesitation is not a scientific disagreement. It's a theological and institutional one. In the year 2000, the Romanovs were canonized as saints, specifically as passion bearers. That means the Church considers their remains to be holy relics. For relics, the standard of certainty is not scientifically beyond reasonable doubt. It is, in effect, certainty beyond any doubt at all. Church officials have argued repeatedly that they want to be absolutely sure before giving the bones of saints a full liturgical burial. There is also a political dimension. The Church felt sidelined during the original investigation carried out under President Boris Yeltsin in the 1990s. Some senior clergy have openly questioned the chain of custody of the remains or raised historical objections to the accounts of the execution itself. A small and vocal movement within Russian Orthodoxy, known as the Tsarobozniki, or Tsar worshippers, has pushed especially hard against recognizing the bones for reasons more ideological than scientific. As of 2025, the remains of Alexei and the daughter recovered from the second grave are still held in a Russian state archive and have never received a church burial. Reports from Russian media in 2024 and 2025 suggest that formal recognition by the Church's Bishops' Council may be approaching, but no official announcement has yet been made. In June 2025, a Russian regional court also ruled to protect the burial site at Porosenkov Log from development, a sign that the site's historical status is being taken increasingly seriously. The key point here is the gap between institutional acceptance and scientific evidence. Those are two very different things. The science has been settled for over a decade. The religious recognition is a separate process that has moved much more slowly. The reality, what the evidence actually supports, returning to the claims we started with, here is how they hold up against what we now know. The claim that the bodies were never really identified. This is not supported by the evidence. Mitochondrial DNA, nuclear DNA, and Y chromosome DNA, tested independently in multiple laboratories in Britain, the United States, and Russia over nearly 3 decades, all point to the same conclusion. The skeletons found at Porosenkov Log are the remains of Tsar Nicholas II, Tsarina Alexandra, their 5 children, and 4 members of their staff. The claim that Anastasia may have survived. This is not supported by any DNA evidence. The 2 skeletons recovered from the second grave in 2007 were confirmed by multiple genetic methods to be the biological children of Nicholas and Alexandra and siblings of the 3 daughters from the first grave. All 4 daughters are accounted for. The mitochondrial DNA of Anna Anderson, the most prominent survival claimant, did not match the Romanov line. The claim that the real identities are still being hidden. There is no evidence of this. Peer-reviewed studies in Nature Genetics, Science, and PLOS I have published the raw data and methods. Multiple independent teams have been able to review and verify the results. The one place where online claims do touch a real piece of uncertainty is the question of which daughter, specifically, was missing from the first grave, Maria or Anastasia. Scientists have been clear that DNA alone cannot resolve this. But this is not the same as saying a Romanov survived. Both daughters are among the identified remains. It is only a question of which name goes with which skeleton. Conclusion. So, are the Romanovs finally identified? Based on the best available evidence, the answer is yes. And yet the cultural life of the story, the imposters, the films, the survival rumors, has continued to circulate largely untouched by any of that. That gap is worth sitting with. The Romanov case is, in many ways, a model of how modern forensic science works on historical questions. It took decades, multiple teams, advancing technology, and the rediscovery of a second grave. It produced findings so statistically strong that, in the words of one geneticist, the odds of a mistake were roughly 1 in a septillion. The science has been settled for more than a decade. But scientific settlement and cultural settlement are not the same thing. Some stories are simply too compelling for the public imagination to let go of, regardless of what the data says. The Romanov mystery is one of them, and it may stay that way for a long time yet. If you found this investigation useful, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next one. We take on one historical mystery at a time and try to look at what the evidence really says without the noise. Engagement prompt. Now we'd like to hear from you. Why do you think stories like the Romanov mystery continue to raise questions even decades after the science has answered them? Does learning about the DNA evidence change how you see this case? Let us know in the comments below.